Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another round of Basis Picks. As always, please like and subscribe, share with a friend, a colleague, a relative, an associate, an enemy, any and all in between. It's appreciated. I would have got these out a little bit earlier, but as you guys know, not only were there ceremonial weigh-ins today, which means that they didn't finish until like 6:30, 7 o'clock, but there was also the Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua press conference that was taking place for the Netflix event on the 19th of December. So those had to take precedent once I came in from work, and obviously the dog as well, as a lot of you know. But yeah, we're here, and without further ado, let's get into the picks. So we're only doing the main 4 bouts on the card because those are the only ones that matter in this instance. We will start with Abdullah Mason versus Sam Noakes. This could be the most interesting fight on the card. Neither guy has fought anyone at world level, but they're fighting for a vacant world title. So they've not even had sort of the step ups of the the former world champion, the fighting in the sort of the rank contenderships to get to the #1 position. But the competition they have faced has allowed both of them to be in the position that they are currently in. Now that yields 2 questions. Who's got the most inexperience still within their system, and who's been able to adjust to the pressure of this contest the right way? Now, if you look at the structures of both, you've got Abdullah Mason from Cleveland, Ohio, who is very much a family person, 21 years old. If I'm correct, he still is at home with his 4 brothers and his dad. They are all devout Muslims, getting up very early in the morning to do their prayers before sort of doing their road work in the gym. All very, sort of very close knit, and it's a really dedicated looking household from all the evidence and the information that we see of them. And when you're grounded in that kind of structure and routine, it's very hard to get someone off of a path, especially if they are someone that shows that internal and that innate discipline from young, which Abdullah Mason does seem to do. Sam Noakes, on the other hand, is obviously he's a brother. He is I guess a devoted child as well. He's from the Stoke area, so I don't really know much about his background in terms of how he goes about his day-to-day life. But if I was to make a guess, and it's a purely an assumptive guess, I could be totally wrong, so apologies for any offense caused, but he does seem a bit like a lad, like a sort of a lad's lad, the kind of person that doesn't mind going out for a beer or 2 outside of camp when they're not in training for a fight. Now, that's not to say that that fun time will not mean that you are not serious in the ring, that you don't take your training seriously or whatnot. But considering that being a devout Muslim, I would assume that Abdullah Mason hasn't had a drink before, or if he has, it was very, very early in his life, and probably is not doing so now. And considering the fact that the legal age to drink in America is 21 anyway, probably wouldn't have had much opportunities to do so. I remember Andre Ward had always said, if you had a drink in the last 10 years, I will make it show in your performance on the night. You will never be able to beat me because my body and your body are not the same. And I'm looking at that in a way in this fight to say, is there a potential that could be something that we see here? Now, I can't remember exactly how old Noakes is, but he's definitely the older of the 2, which in theory also means that he's probably got the more man strength. Like, he's actually sort of grown and developed into that frame. and into sort of the, you know, sort of he's at closer to the peak of where he's going to sit in terms of power than Abdullah Mason does. But what Abdullah has is the technique. I believe that Noakes probably has the strength advantage and maybe is a bit more gritty, rough and ready to throw hands, whereas Abdullah is a more of the you know, the southpaw, the slick guy, the one that will stay on the inside, you know, sort of work to the body, throw devastating sharpshooter shots up top, trying to keep himself defensible. Now we have seen recently, you know, within the last year and a half, so the last 18 months, Abdullah has been caught heavily in a fight. You could say it was 2 flash knockdowns. He didn't really exhibit any adverse effects from either of them, but getting dropped twice in the first round doesn't necessarily bode well for you kind of when you're looking at how the fights ultimately play out and what happens moving forward. You know, when you're that young, you're supposed to be going through sort of what they call the, you know, the lesser runs, the building and the learning fights. I'm sure one of his learnings wasn't to how to respond to being on the ground. That being said, the fact that he adjusted to it and actually was able to do it so effectively, get up, dust it off, tighten up and still get the stoppage like 2 rounds later, I think that's a good sign, because it shows that he was able to deal with the adversity, especially at a moment in time when you're not even really supposed to have it. Now since then, he has never been caught lacking in terms of his defense when he's been in the pocket. He's not been as aggressive in terms of, you know, going all out to KO his opponent, but he still has been getting the KOs, just been a lot more measured and keeping his hands close to the doors. So I think the main thing in this fight that's going to tell the tale is the fact that Sam Noakes is very effective in what he does, but what he does look very crude from the outside. It may be effective on the inside, but from the outside it looks very crude. However, when you get Abdullah Mason, you get him moving around the target from that southpaw angle, which Noakes, I don't believe, has had a huge amount of experience with as a pro. I think he's fought a couple of southpaws, but not a huge amount. That's the big adjustment. And that's the one thing that I've kind of got the issue with. How does he adjust and how does he delve into sort of his bag of tricks and nullify all of the advantages that a southpaw would have against an orthodox fighter? On the other hand, there is one thing that is a little bit concerning with Mason. Now, obviously, as I said, he's been dropped. He's tightened up from that. But notoriously, we've kind of seen that Americans, for the most part, don't seem to travel the greatest over in Saudi. The majority of them have seemed to have been taken out in a lot of these Saudi shows. And you know, there's a big time difference between some, especially if those that are based on the west coast of America. It's a huge time difference for them, and you know, East Coast isn't that much better. I think it's like 7 hours on the East Coast and 9-10 hours on the West. So whereas someone like Sam Noakes coming from the UK, it's a 2-hour time difference. You barely need to adjust to the jet lag. The most you're going to adjust to is like trying to get your sleeping pattern changed from, you know, maybe sleeping in the late evening to, you know, early morning, to actually sleeping in the middle of the night and waking up in the middle of the day. That's the adjustment that maybe they have to do. Who knows where we kind of go from there. However, I am going to trust that the person who has lived the cleaner life, the person with the very close-knit and tight family dynamic, and the person who I believe is the more skillful, plus also equally as powerful, if not maybe a smidge less powerful but more accurate person in Abdullah Mason, is going to claim victory in this fight. Now, I actually think Noakes is going to be pretty tough. So I've got a suspicion that Abdullah Mason will be forced to go the distance in this one. He's never gone 12 rounds in a fight before. He obviously has been the distance, but they was in, I think, 4-rounders or 6-rounders. Sam Noakes also has never, from what I can remember, gone 12 rounds. I think he's gone 10, but I don't know if he's gone 12. So it will be another thing for him. But I think the toughness and the fact that these are each person's best fight means that they're both going to try and be a bit cautious in there, and neither is going to go directly for the knockout early. And I think by the time they do try and go for the knockout, the other person should still be coherent enough to be able to defend themselves and block the attacks. So I'm going to go for a points decision with Abdullah Mason. It just feels right to me on this one. Subsequently, all future parts of this will be a little less wordy because I don't have to explain certain things that I've just explained in this section. But yeah, Abdullah Mason to win, points decision. Next, we got Bam Rodriguez against Puma Martinez. So Jesse Rodriguez against Fernando Martinez, and this one is definitely going to be interesting. You got Mexico versus Argentina. You've got the boxer puncher versus the pressure fighter, or Martinez is more kind of an ambush fighter, I would say. Now, I've seen quite a bit of Puma, and one thing about him, he is gritty. However, I think another thing, while he can drag you into a war, is extremely tough and will play mind games with you to get you to fight the type of fight he wants, which is basically close quarters, stick to me, I will outpace you, I will outspeed you, I will basically dominate this pocket. Whereas on the other hand, you've got Jesse Bam Rodriguez, who actually loves a person that comes towards him so that he can work not so much even off the back foot, but slip off of the angles from that southpaw stance, get round the sides, apply constant movement and a constant pressure within sort of like a small semicircle, punch from angles that the opponent hasn't seen coming, and punch extremely hard. Now, Martinez, I think the fact that he's going to be such a come forward fighter, it's going to mean that if Bam's power holds up, especially talking about the transition from, you know, the American time zone to the Saudi time zone, if the power is there from early and he's able to inflict damage early, especially to the body, which I have a feeling he will be trying to move for, he can make it extremely horrible for Puma Martinez. We know that Argentinians are notoriously extremely tough to the head, but a lot of them do seem to get stopped with body shots. That in itself could be the moment for Bam to target. Now, in terms of Puma, his best efforts here, I believe, is to draw Bam to actually come forward and him be the one that makes Bam have to be the aggressor rather than him try to rush. Now, Bam doesn't necessarily like to be the one to come forward. He likes his opponents to come forward to him, but he is quite good at doing both. However, when he does come forward, he usually, while making steps, especially if he's taking like a half step forward or a slight lateral step, he lets his guard slip. And in those moments, if Puma can see that, ambush, get in a flurry and then step back out, it will make Bam want to basically get it back. And every time he goes to get it back, you can exploit the weaknesses. It's very, very, I won't say dangerous, but unless Puma knows that he's got the engine to outlast Bam regardless of what he does, and he can throw in combinations, trying to fight this fight on the front foot right in front of Bam is basically going to be a futile attempt. It's going to be the easiest way for him to potentially get knocked out in this fight. But I do think that ultimately, him being the type of guy he is, the antagonist he is going to attempt to move forward at all times. And I think that is going to be the way that Bam ultimately gets the eye-catching shots that the judges will remember throughout rounds, which will ultimately get him those rounds. I'm not sure that Bam wins this via KO or TKO. I think Puma Martinez is a very strong, durable guy. He came in a little bit underweight, a pound and a half, I think, under the actual limit, which is interesting. Did he just do too much, or is he comfortably sitting at the super flyweight division? Sorry. So that part I'm not sure of. I'm gonna tentatively again go with a points decision for Bam Rodriguez, but I think it's gonna be a competitive but quite clear points decision. Although, a knockout between rounds 9 to 11 wouldn't be a bad shout either. So next, we got Devin the Dream Haney versus Brian the Assassin 2 Norman Jr. This is an interesting fight. Look, you got Brian Norman, I guess, who is the naturally bigger guy, if that's the case. Devin's obviously the taller, the longer, sort of the longer ranged person. He seems to walk around at a weight that's much higher than what Brian Norman does, or at least he used to. However, Brian Norman has never been able to get down to 140, let alone 135. So that's interesting in itself, because he's obviously still growing. He is actually younger than Devin, which is, I think, is the first time Devin's facing someone that's younger than him. He's definitely got the power aspect. A little bit slow-footed, not super slow, but he plants his feet to get maximum power. So he likes someone that actually sits in the pocket or just on that inside of his range, rather than having to try and sort of hunt someone down. Now Devin, we know, has quite fast feet, decent footwork. It's not actually that great, but it's good enough. But it's the fact that he's got the speed of foot that is the main thing. He also does have the reach advantage, which means if he can operate the jab and he can stay just to the peripherals of range at all times in this fight, but he can drive that jab through the middle, he can rack up quite a significant lead through the judges' eyes just by showing clear and concise damage being applied by the lead hand. His issues are going to be when he wants to bring the backhand into play. Brian Norman likes to counter. Not only does he like to counter, he is more than willing to take a shot to give a shot. He believes in his chin. Not saying that he uses it as a crutch, but he believes that he can take a shot, but also while taking that shot, possibly even riding that shot to take some of the sting off of it, he can get you into a position where you now are exposed to one of his. And his motto is, my shot is gonna outland and outbang yours. And this fight is going to come down to two things. Devin has got all of the top flight experience here, so he should have the know-how and the tactical nous to be able to take away some of Norman's best assets while keeping himself relatively safe. But he's got to stay switched on for 12 rounds. Now, being at 147, I would assume that making the weight isn't as difficult or draining as it was when he was at 140, and definitely not in the later years at 135. So he should have more energy. But I believe this kind of plays out all about how the referee approaches. If Devin Haney is allowed to spear jab, throw right hands, dip underneath shots, and then go in for a hug or a clinch, and is allowed to do that consistently throughout the fight, he pretty much wins the fight easily. A wide points decision. We're talking 9-3, 10-2 type situation, just because all you're going to remember is the jab, the 1-2, or the backhand landing, and then Norman not being allowed to basically retaliate or get it back. But if the referee is onto Devin regarding this and actually breaks it, and possibly even starts docking points for excessive clinching or excessive dipping below the waist, which you're not allowed to do as a pro within the rule books, and Devin gets points taken off and now has to actually fight to stop doing that, because obviously he wouldn't want to lose a points decision, that would also make him have to fight more. Now, One thing that is not questionable about Devin, a lot of people can question maybe tactics, he doesn't like to get hit, etc, etc. No boxer really does, but it's hard to question his heart. Obviously the Ryan Garcia fight, I gave Ryan 4 rounds in that fight. I still believe Devin actually won, even though he got knocked down 3 times, but he got knocked down heavily multiple times and still kept getting up, still tried to survive, still tried to carry on, still tried to fight. In the Linares fight, similar thing, got hurt, stayed in there. Lomachenko fight, there was moments that he was in trouble, stayed in there. So I don't think he's the kind of person that will capitulate, and I think that for him to get beaten Norman Jr., I don't think he's going to be able to outbox Devin. He might win some rounds, but the rounds he wins is not going to be because he outboxed or outfoxed Devin, in my opinion. It's going to be because he hurt him, and the judges saw that Devin was visibly hurt, backing off, was forced to be out of his construct and fight a different fight or fight a way that he hadn't been fighting normally. Those are the rounds that Norman wins for me, the rounds where he affects the way Devin chooses to fight the fight. But Devin wins the rounds where it's about jab and scoring shots and shot placement. At 147 total, don't know whether Devin's power is going to increase, whether he's going to be able to turn into his shots correctly, rotate the arm, keep the foot grounded before twisting the hips into the punch. I don't know if he's going to have any different mechanics up there with the additional energy, so I can't in good faith say that he would get a stoppage in this fight. That would definitely be on Norman's side. But in my prediction, I think that Devin's extra experience is going to be what gets him over the line. I do think there's going to be some moments in this fight where he's going to be back in that Garcia fight, and he may have to drag himself either off the canvas, or he may have to drag himself out of a dark situation, whether that's getting wobbled and having to try and navigate it, or feeling a shot that he didn't want to take and doesn't want to take again. So when I look at this one, I do think that he is gonna win just due to the extra experience level. I don't think it's going to be a straightforward win, but I do think it will end up being a unanimous decision one. And last but not least, we've got David Benavidez versus Anthony Yarde. Now, these two have been very respectful to each other, especially in their face, but then when they're away from each other, they seem to be a little bit more certain in their verbiage and, talking about knocking each other out. Like, neither guy has explicitly said, I'm going to knock you out, when they've been in front of each other, but when they've been in other interviews, they've been talking about getting the knockout. So I don't know if they're not keeping the same energy, or if they're just trying to redirect energy or conserve energy in those moments. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for the time being. What I do think though is I wasn't able to see the at the weigh-in photos, not the ceremonial ones. We're talking about the actual weigh-in from the morning to see how both guys looked. What I did notice, and this was brought to my attention in my group chat with the rest of the Fight Talk Live guys, especially Danny Glover, who put it in there when he showed their weights, and you had Benavidez was like 174.6, I think, and then Yarde was like 173.9, something along those lines. Now, what was telling is they did those weigh-ins at about, I'd say about 11 o'clock Saudi Arabian time, which would have been 9 or it would have been sort of 8-9 o'clock over here, possibly even 10 o'clock over here. Maybe it was midday over there, but I think it was 11 because we got the information around about 10 something. They're not fighting until 4 o'clock in the morning Saudi time. So when you actually check it, I've actually made a complaint within the group chat saying that shouldn't be right, because they're getting 40 hours to rehydrate between the weigh-in and the actual fight night fight. That's not supposed to be procedure. I know no one ever really gets like the 24 hours, which is what it's usually supposed, but it's usually about 30. You get 26 to 30 hours, but to get almost 40, almost like 2 days worth of rehydration back, both guys likely getting in the ring at over 200 pounds a piece, it just makes a mockery of having the weight classes, and it just means that realistically, if you can put on 25 pounds the following day, there's absolutely no reason you should be campaigning in a weight class that is that low. I can't lie, I'm all in favor of having same day weigh-ins again, and making people, or having people walk around closer to their fight weights. So before you go into a camp, they see what your weight is. If you're more than say 15 pounds over the weight class you're claiming to campaign in, you no longer allowed to claim. You have to move to a division where you are within 15 pounds, so within 1 stone. I think that is more, that in itself would be a lot more safe than being able to take off 20, 30, sometimes 40 or 50 pounds in a training camp and then put half of it back on the day after. But that's besides the point. Looking at them both at the ceremonial weigh-ins, I didn't really sort of delve into both too tough. It looks like Anthony Yarde's actually, he looks like he's gotten a bit darker. I feel like he's maybe caught a bit of a tan since he's been out there. But in terms of how both guys looked, Benavidez yesterday looked a bit sunken in and a bit grey, but I feel like he looked a lot better in the rehydration than Yarde did. Now maybe that's because he had the chance to hydrate a little bit more, maybe because he's a little bit more fleshy, whereas Yarde is a lot more lean, so there's a lot less like fat to sort of put on, or to to sort of make him look a bit fuller. But yeah, Benavidez looked like the slightly healthier guy at that particular point. He's definitely, I reckon, going to be the heavier of the two on fight night. So it's going to be about whose power and whose work rate can outlast and outstrike the opponents. I think Yarde may just about have the power advantage, but I don't think it's by much. He's not as big a puncher as a lot of people claim him to be or believe him to be. I feel like the level of opposition he's fought outside of the champions is what makes you believe that he's got that power. But recent fights against, Ralph's Vilcans, and the third fight with Lyndon Arthur, as well as a couple of other fights, and the way that he kind of dispatches of the opposition makes me believe that the power isn't what people believe it to be. On the other hand, David Benavidez also is not a big power guy. At 168, he knocked out a lot of people through accumulation, through swarm, high work rate, and also being much bigger than them. A lot of the guys that he fought at 168 were actually pumped up 160 guys, a couple of even 154 guys that had been pumped up to 168. Yeah, there were some legitimate 168 guys, but also the majority of them were kind of faded. And the biggest advocate for the 168 that he should have probably been able to deal with, especially going after the Canelo fight, was the Caleb Plant fight. Plant never ended up off his feet once, survived the whole 12 rounds. Like, argument that he basically won the first half of the fight, David won the second half. So you kind of look at that. Then he comes up to light heavy, essentially has a stakeout with Alexander Gvozdyk, who I still till this day maintain actually won that fight, and had he have been the A side, he would have been given a victory. You look at the fight at the end of it, and Gvozdyk didn't have a mark on him, whereas Benavidez looked beat up like he had been assaulted by 2 or 3 people. And I still think that Gvozdyk at times was pulling his punches as well. So you look at that performance, then you look at the performance with David Morrell, who was another guy that also came up from 168, but is a naturally smaller guy than David. And David's the one that ended up potentially getting dropped, controversial or not, and just basically was able to outwork Morrell, who is Cuban, and you know, Cubans are notorious for maybe not being the most high volume and high work rate individuals. So looking at that and then looking at this, it's about, can Anthony Yarde get this fight over in the first 7 rounds? I feel if he can employ his combinations, if he can stay defensible and be able to stave off a jab from Benavidez, he's going to have some real success. Because while Benavidez does have some little sneaky movements whereby he actually does ride shots, especially shots to the head, a little bit better than people would expect, he is also still hittable and has the tendency to square up, especially when throwing the backhand. If Yarde can get the timing in between one of those shots and actually be a front foot counter puncher, which he has been known to do at times in his career, with the high guard especially, I feel like he could do some real damage, especially if he decides to invest to the body early, because you know there's a lot of fleshy midsection to go after when it comes to David Benavidez. And if you can sort of try to wear out and drain those reserves, especially considering how he kind of did look earlier on in the week trying to make the weight. He said he made it easy, but his face and body maybe told us a little bit different. The weight's clearly difficult for both guys to make. I feel like David is already ready to move up another division, hence why I said before that he, as far as I'm concerned, he's just looking at Zurdo Ramirez fight. If Yarde can put in a sustained attack to the body and stay to the body, forget about the head for the for the early parts of the fight, just work on that body 4, 5, 6 rounds, then mix up body and head at round 7, round 8, while still having something in the tank, he's going to cause an upset and win this fight. The only problem is I don't know if I can see that being his game plan. I don't think it will be. I think ultimately he's going to try to counterpunch Benavidez, but Benavidez is going to be a bit more disciplined. He's going to box not from distance, but he's going to employ more jabs than he usually does. I feel like he's going to keep the right hand just for when it's safe. He'll probably go to the body a little bit as well. He'll test the chin a little bit, but he'll try to get on the inside when he doesn't feel it's safe to be on the outside. Stay on the inside, throw some shots, maybe try to clinch Yarde, push him up towards the ropes, make him have to throw him off and exert extra energy, knowing that Yarde doesn't have the greatest of gas tanks. Obviously all that lean muscle requires a lot more oxygen. I think David is going to just outwork Yarde in the first half of the fight. Then in the second half, he's also had a drop in work rate recently, so I don't feel like he's gonna overtake, but I feel like Anthony Yarde just won't have the necessary drive, and I don't feel like he'll have the necessary engine to be able to get that second win, to go and make those moments whereby he can actually get through to David and take advantage of him also being tired. So for that purpose, I am gonna go with David Benavidez to win this fight. There is a very slim chance I feel like he could get a late stoppage. Most of Yarde's defeats have come via stoppage, but I think Yarde will be able to hold on. I actually think he will come on strong right towards the end after having maybe lost a huge majority of the middle rounds. But yeah, I think it would just be too little too late, and David will win a competitive, fairly close decision, maybe 116, 112, 115, 113. That's my prediction. Please leave yours down below. Let me know what you guys think of the fights and who you think is going to win each. I've not predicted any knockouts on this one, so I'm hoping there are some to make the night go a little bit quicker, but hey, it is what it is. With that being said, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and hit that hype button. For right now, Basis Picks, locked.